It's strange how the smallest moments can decide the course of an entire life. At the time, I didn't realize how much was at stake. I only knew that the seminary loomed over me like a dark cloud, and Capitu was the light breaking through. Days passed, and the tension in our house grew heavier. My mother prayed constantly, her rosary beads clicking softly as she whispered her devotion. José Díaz hovered nearby, offering his opinions, always careful to remain on my mother's good side. But even he had begun to waver, thanks to Capitu's quiet persistence. Then, one morning, my mother called me into her room. She was sitting by the window, her Bible open on her lap. The sunlight framed her face, making her look almost saintly. "Bento," she said, her voice softer than usual. "I've been thinking about what Capitu said." I froze. Was this it? Had Capitu's words finally reached her? "She's a good girl," my mother continued, "and she cares for you. But this decision isn't hers to make. It's not even mine. It belongs to God." My heart sank. I wanted to argue, to plead with her, but I knew it wouldn't matter. Her faith was unshakable, and her promise was sacred. A week later, the decision was made. I was to leave for the seminary. My mother cried as she packed my things, but I could see the resolve in her eyes. She believed she was doing what was best for me, even if it broke her heart. The day I left was overcast, the sky heavy with unfallen rain. Capitu came to see me off. She stood by the gate, her arms crossed over her chest, her face a mask of defiance. "Don't go," she said, her voice low but firm. "I don't have a choice," I replied, my throat tight. "There's always a choice," she shot back, her eyes blazing. I wanted to believe her, but it was too late. The carriage was waiting, and my mother was watching from the doorway. I reached out to touch Capitu's hand, but she pulled away. "Promise me something," she said. "Anything. Promise me you won't forget." I nodded, though I wasn't sure what I was promising. How could I forget her? She was in every thought, every breath. But I didn't say that. Instead, I climbed into the carriage and left her standing there alone. The seminary was nothing like I'd imagined. It was a cold, rigid place, full of rules and rituals that seemed designed to strip away every trace of individuality. The days were long and monotonous, filled with prayers, lessons, and endless silence. At first, I tried to adapt. I wanted to make my mother proud, to prove to myself that I could follow the path she had chosen for me. But no matter how hard I tried, I couldn't stop thinking about Capitu. Her voice echoed in my mind, her laughter, her defiance. One night, as I lay in my narrow bed, staring at the ceiling, I realized something. I didn't belong here. This wasn't my life. It was someone else's, a life imposed on me by promises I hadn't made. The next morning, I wrote a letter to my mother. I told her everything, how unhappy I was, how much I missed home, and how I couldn't ignore the pull of the world outside the seminary walls. It was the hardest thing I'd ever done, but I knew it was the truth. Weeks passed before I received a reply. When it finally came, I tore it open with trembling hands. Her words were brief but filled with love. She told me she understood, that she only wanted what was best for me, and that I could come home. I left the seminary the very next day. As the carriage carried me back to Rio, I felt a strange mix of relief and fear. I didn't know what awaited me, but I knew one thing. I was free. When I arrived home, Capitu was waiting. She was standing by the gate, just as she had been the day I left. But this time, her arms weren't crossed, and her face wasn't defiant. She smiled when she saw me, a smile that felt like sunlight breaking through the clouds. "You came back," she said simply. "I promised I wouldn't forget," I replied, but coming home was only the beginning. The choices I made after that, choices shaped by love, jealousy, and ambition, would change everything. In the next chapter, I'll tell you how Capitu and I began to dream of a future together, and how those dreams set us on a path we could never turn back from. Stay with me. Our story is far from over. Our story is far